honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the panel on recovery after shocks. It's my great honor to moderate this panel. My name is Damian Szacawa. I'm assistant professor at the Curie-Skłodowska University and the senior analyst in the Institute of Central Europe in Lublin. My research is focused on international organizations, international cooperation in the Baltic Sea region, and international security. I strongly believe that our panel will do its best to answer the question on how can the strategy help Baltic Sea region communities become more resilient, stronger, and sustainable, better at bouncing back after economic, political, social, and health crisis. Now, allow me to introduce you to our great speakers. First of all, Mr. Simonas Šatūnas. He is head of cabinet of Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevičius, Environment, Oceans and Fisheries from the European Commission. Ms. Ulla-Karin Nurm. She is a director of the Northern Dimension Partnership in Public Health and Social Well-being and the coordinator for the policy area health. Mr. Slawomir Tokarski, director for the European Territorial Cooperation, Macro Regions, Interreg and Programs Implementation, DG Regio. Dr. Tomasz Studzieniecki from Gdynia Maritime University and member of Management Committee of the European Non-Territorial Autonomy Network, ENTAN, and Ms. Simonas, representative of the Baltic Sea YAF camp. I think that the main topic of our panel, recovery after shocks, and answer to this question, how to recover, is not an easy task, because as all we know, regional cooperation in the Baltic Sea region is multifaceted and based on the activities of many actors, including states, international organizations, regional and local communities, and the third sector. This is also a key characteristic of the strategy, which implies multi-level cooperation and the use of already existing financial opportunities. This plurality of actors, stakeholders, sometimes is perceived as a challenge, because there is a question of how to avoid unnecessary overlapping of measures and projects. But on the other hand, and this is closer to my understanding, the activity of different actors is of key importance for the resilience and adaptability of our regional system. When we look into political theory, I could refer to Talcott Parsons and James Rosenau and their research, which proved that system capabilities to stay alive in a changing, turbulent international relations, international environment, is derived from its ability to adapt. But before we will talk about system abilities and so on, I'd like to ask our panelists, what do you think is the biggest challenge, biggest shock to the Baltic Sea region? And I'd like to ask firstly Mr. Šatūnas.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Moderator, for presenting. Yes, I'm the head of cabinet of Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevičius from European Commission, whose portfolio, whose mission in this commission, this mandate of the commission is environment, oceans, and fisheries. So obviously, I'm going to speak from our portfolio or how we see the biggest challenge or the big shock for the Baltic Sea. Actually, you have not indicated the time frame. What is the shock? Because yesterday we also saw a shock.
If you could if you could briefly introduce us to the main shock, and then I will give you, let's say, a longer time for a longer answer.
No, I just wanted to put in frame, because when we talk about shocks, there are some ongoing shocks that's still ongoing, that started years ago, and we need to admit that these shocks need to be addressed. And the shock that yesterday, because of the explosions on the Nord Stream and under the sea, it's also a shock. But we should not forget maybe not always the situation which is on the top screens of the newspapers and of media. So that's why I'm putting in the context, but because we believe and we are trying to put on the political agenda of many decision makers of the member states and the states around, on the politicians, about the environmental challenges for the Baltic Sea. There is nothing here to hide. The Baltic Sea is not really in a good shape. And on the standard issues of the biodiversity loss, which is obviously in the Baltic Sea, we still have some specific shocks that this region, this sea is undergoing, and obviously communities around it. So obviously it is eutrophication of the Baltic Sea, overfishing, dumped munitions, and contaminants. And not to say about overall what the COVID has brought to this environment. So these challenges are ongoing. They're for years. Unfortunately, situation is not getting better, especially with the nitrates in the Baltic Sea and the fishing capabilities. Obviously, it is being impacted communities around. But what to do next? In our view, and Commission is trying really to try to facilitate more efforts on the blue economy. On the blue economy, what the communities can benefit. And a lot of blue economy initiatives or maybe drivers are coming from the well-known European Green Deal policy that was launched in the mandate of this Commission. The targets, maybe you can put together the Green Deal, and that might be of the value for the Baltic Sea region, is it's very clear. The reduction of the CO2 emissions, carbon neutrality, reduction of the pollution, circular economy, and oceans health. So we believe we still need, while addressing these shocks, which I named before, we need to work on them. What is ongoing, so you obviously know that after COVID, the Commission and Member States has agreed on the exceptional in the history of the European Union on the financial instrument how to help Member States to recover. It's the Recovery and Resilience Facility, huge opportunity for all Member States and all their stakeholders, where the blue economies can benefit, and investments into blue economies can be there. But what we see now, it's maybe only very few countries around Baltic Sea are taking the opportunity of this. I just want to highlight, let's say, Poland, where in the national plans, Poland is really putting a lot of emphasis on the specific energy resilience or alternative renewable projects like offshore wind, first of all, and they are putting in their national recovery and resilience plan a project of 3 billion euros to develop the offshore facility. Lithuania and Finland also doing some investments toward that direction, but we think that opportunities are still there, and more things can be done using especially this recovery and resilience facility.
And I will ask you about these possibilities. How can we do in the next round?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Ulla-Karin Nurm, from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge for us, for our region?
Thank you, Damian, for this question and for the opportunity to address this in this audience. My background is medical and health and public health and well-being, so everything what I'm going to say would be presumably related to health and well-being. And of course, you know, it's very fair to start with that the recent things in the world globally, pandemic and the war have taken its toll on people's health and well-being. But when you are asking about what is the biggest shock, I would say that the biggest shock is that the world is not what we used to think it is. The universal values turned out to be not so universal. And in our partnership, the Northern Dimension Partnership in Public Health and Social Well-being, some partners have utterly disappointed, and this is a huge understatement. This is about the pandemic and the war, but there are many other challenges. And of course, you know, one of the challenge which we all know and face is getting through the cold winter and beating out Russia from Ukraine. At the same time, we have the biodiversity crisis, as mentioned by the previous speaker. We have environmental breakdown. We have societal challenges. People are depressed, they are anxious about future. We have increasing gaps in social justice. We have rising level of loneliness. We have mental health epidemic, especially among youth. And we have overconsumption. We are eating too much, and this all, maybe drinking too much, and this all adds up to the health issues that we need to tackle with. So this is all a result of an unsafe growth. And the unsafe growth is a result of us aiming economic growth. Maybe I stop here.
Great.
And I think I have used my time, but I would like to come back to this.
Of course, you will have the occasion in the next round. And thank you for your point. And now let's ask Mr. Slawomir Tokarski about his opinion about the biggest shock, how it looks from the Brussels.
Well, I don't think I will surprise you if I say that this is war, this is Russian aggression, and I mean, we somewhat get used to it, but just to show you how long way we did and what we thought about the war just a couple of years ago, I will quote to you the beginning of European security strategy, which was adopted in the beginning of 21st century, and which was in force until only a couple of years ago. So it was starting with these words: Europe has never been so prosperous, so secure, nor so free. The violence of the first half of the 20th century has given way to a period of peace and stability unprecedented in European history. So quite away from the state of mind that we find ourselves today. Now, what does it mean for cohesion policy? This means what we nicely term a series of asymmetrical shocks. These shocks that affect territories to different degree and potentially act against the cohesion, creating new pockets of poverty and reversing back the process that we went so far and quite successful. I mean, we are in the region which is probably facing this challenge quite significantly. We are close to Russian border, which just a couple of months ago was crossed by tourists, were crossed by goods, was crossed by energy carriers. So it was a whole range of different interactions from which the regions were benefiting economically, and now it is just a wall. And now, with this cooperation with Russia, which took us 20 years to develop it quite successfully, now it's all gone. And the regions like this one, they have to find themselves in a new situation and think how to repair those, what we call disrupted value chains, how to avoid the sort of negative perception by investors, and how to reinvent themselves and find new partners for the cooperation. So I think this is one challenge. The other challenge is that we are faced with changes which are very abrupt and come up very unexpectedly. Well, if you think about the explosions in Nord Stream yesterday, the mass movement of young men from Russia, these are all changes that were quite dramatic and that leave us little time to adapt. So how to reconcile this type of challenges with a policy which is predominantly long-term, and also with a strategy, which politics strategy is predominantly long-term strategy. And maybe finally there is this issue of energy poverty that is caused by the war. And again, this is the factor that will impact quite significantly on the situation of people, of communities, of regions, and which can act very strongly against the cohesion. So again, the question is, the challenge is how cohesion policy can address this type of challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your voice, and now I'd like to ask Dr. Tomasz Studzieniecki of your opinion.
Good morning. I am Tomasz Studzieniecki from Gdynia Maritime. From Gdynia Maritime Academy, but I also represent the European network called European Network of Non-Territorial Autonomy, and I will say a few words about last research. So I want to raise the issue of social minorities, especially national minorities, ethnic minorities. This issue is extremely important in our geopolitical situation. I mean that the situation concerns not only national minorities. I mean like Ukrainians, but also there are several citizens of Russia who finds our region very attractive. So let me show the results of my research. I will say that there is the initiative called ENTAN, and this is the initiative that is promoting the special tool called Non-Territorial Autonomy. It means that this is the forum that helps to find the way reducing inter-ethnic tensions and also support development of minority rights. We are a network gathering 100 scholars from 36 countries. One of the elements of the research was to show what is the structure of national minorities in the Baltic Sea region. I know it's very small, so I will briefly say what were the results. The results was that I concentrated in my research in the period to 214, 220, and it was very interesting that for every country there is nearly different minorities. So the largest minority, for example, in Poland was Germans, in Sweden there were Finns, and in Estonia and Latvia there were Russians. So this is the issue of minorities. But what was another interesting result? Another interesting result was so-called majorities. So the situation was very differentiated. For example, in Latvia, there were 62% of Latvians in Latvia. And the different situation was in Poland, that it was over 96% of Poles in Poland. Then I have seen another interesting process. In nearly every country except Belarus, the number of minorities was increasing, what it means that the number of majorities was decreasing. So this is very important. And of course, this tendency will grow, because we know that probably the number of newcomers will still increase. Another interesting result of the research was how do projects of European territorial cooperation and neighborhood instruments support ethnic minorities. I have examined 38 programs, and in 38 programs I found 126 projects supporting minorities. I would say only 126, but what was very interesting, those projects supported four types of activities. They supported heritage, they supported education, and only few of them gave political empowerment. And what is interesting, that the best case study of projects supporting minorities were projects supporting Sami minorities, that you see 71 projects I found supporting Sami minorities. So it can be good example for other minorities in the Baltic Sea region. And I want to give a good case study. For example, there was the Interreg cross-border program. It is the situation, the project of Poland and Lithuania, that within the project, the Center of Free Cultures were created. It was in Poland, in Suchowola. So this is the example how to use Interreg money to promote, to help ethnic minorities. You see the picture, there are representatives of three religions. Catholic religion, Tatar religion, and Jewish religion. So I raise the question, is it possible to find synergy between EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region and ENTAN instrument? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we will listen to answer to these questions at the next stage. And now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Simonas and ask you about the same. What is the biggest shock, biggest challenge for the Baltic Sea region from your perspective, from the perspective of YAF in the Baltic Sea?
Yeah, I think youth is not one homogeneous group. Youth is everybody. Youth are on a different political spectrum or on different society levels. So everything that has been mentioned, I think, for groups of youth could be called as the #1 crisis. There is no doubt about it. But I also see that while we speak about this crisis, it's kind of shocking in a way how much we're shocked by every single crisis. So maybe sometimes the crisis is that we don't have so much resilience against the crises that are coming our way, and we know a lot of dangers, but we still lack instruments and capacity building. So this could be seen also as a very important issue for the youth, because especially with the youth, you can build networks, you can build communities who are resilient, who are able to make quick decisions and make innovative decisions to deal with whatever crisis is going to come next tomorrow, or those who are staying, like climate change, nitrification, all of those, because we still need to deal with those. So that's my thought.
Thank you very much for your point. And now let's go to the second round of questions, and we'll still in this main topic about recovery after shocks. And now I'd like to ask our panelists how our regional communities can deal with the issue you named before. What conditions have to be met? And maybe you could propose some recommendation for the Baltic Sea strategy stakeholders. And again, I'd like to start from Mr. Šatūnas.
Thank you very much.
And now it's a little bit longer time for your speech.
Okay. I started, I don't know that I'm not sure that the shock is over. Well, your topic is saying what we do after the shocks, but the shocks is definitely not over, and not only in the environment that I'm talking about, but the colleague was talking about the health probably and other ongoing shocks. Now, how we see if it is ongoing, the processes and response also has to be ongoing. And how the regional communities can benefit or can play, obviously what we see and what we're trying to facilitate is regional cooperation. Regional cooperation, various strategies and instruments obviously brings a lot of opportunity, not only cooperation among the member states around the Baltic Sea, but across the certain regions of the member states. So regional cooperation, in our view, if we talk about long-term positive impact on the Baltic Sea region, and if we focus on the blue economy that we're still trying to push and trying to present of the alternative to various other marine activities in the Baltic Sea. So regional cooperation for blue economy projects are critical, absolutely critical, because only them could bring together academia and business from across certain regions. What Commission has proposed, and I think after consultation with member states, how to have more stakeholders involved in this regional cooperation. So Commission has started, and probably it is one of the really successful instruments, is the platforms of the so-called smart specialization. Certain topics that certain stakeholders, regions can can pull together businesses, research, administration, local administration, and try to push on. One of the smart specialization events that we hosted and we promoted, it was, I'm just giving an example, but probably this is the area where there are a lot of opportunities. It's on the coastal tourism, and that was last June in Sweden, and it was really well received by a lot of stakeholders there from around the Baltic Sea. And it focused on the specific topics, on the digitalization, innovative tourism, ecotourism, circularity in the tourism, which is becoming the trend not only in a big industry, but in almost in every day of our life. So this smart specialization instrument, facilitated by European Commission, by colleagues from DG Mare, is probably a good example how we can do another small, or not a small, step towards the different topics. Another thing is offshore energy. Offshore energy, you know very well, after the increasing pressure of the energy resources supply this summer, Commission proposed and member states adopted the Repower EU strategy, and by 2030 the targets to increase renewables in the overall energy mix for the member states has been increased and agreed by the member states from 40% to 45%. So it seems that on renewable energy we have a lot of opportunities to go on and to work, and the targets are pretty high. And I just want to maybe highlight that recently, I think it was in end of August, there was a high-level meeting in Denmark where the President von der Leyen, together with the heads of government of the Baltic and Nordic states, participated, and they have committed or pledged to increase the capacity of renewable energy generation to 20 gigawatts by 2030. So 20 gigawatts, but now what we have in the Baltic Sea around is only 2.8 gigawatts of capacity installed. So it seems that there is a big and long way to go. So we see that whatever we can do to promote, and if there is an interest, so probably offshore wind projects development is going to be another opportunity for the regional communities and for the regional stakeholders to play. Obviously, it's not a one member state project, it's cross-border project, so this regional cooperation will be absolutely critical. And maybe a final word, how to respond, or maybe we will still need to look into the future. Back in 2020, Commissioner Sinkevičius and European Commission initiated a conference on the so-called Our Politic. Why it was special? Because we tried to bring not only ministers of fisheries, agriculture, and separately, but environment as well. Because usually we can see that the Baltic Sea, like I mentioned before, is suffering from the negative impacts coming from the agriculture on the fisheries, but environment ministers are here. So all the member states ministers, 3 of them, each coming from each member state, has committed or pledged to try to do certain projects or targets to reduce the pollution and to address the other negative trends on the Baltic Sea. So I think these 3 elements, or 3 maybe priorities are key, or they are bringing the biggest opportunities. And here the regional communities and regional stakeholders will have an opportunity, big role to play, but also might have a lot of benefits as well. So 7 projects that I was mentioning is already being promoted by European Commission, and we will be working further. But again, this is just address to ongoing long-term shock that this Baltic Sea region is experiencing. And I just want to highlight that we should not forget about long-term challenges when focusing on the short-term highlights that are sometimes on our political agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. I think that we should remember and totally agree with you that we have at the same time facing short-term and long-term challenges. And now I'd like to ask Ms. Ulla-Karin Nurm, from your perspective, you talk about social well-being, social inequalities. how can we deal with them?
Thank you for the question. And I think it's very fair to say that the recent shocks have hit us all with full force. And while we have been able to cope with them to a certain extent, our systems are not really able to cope and to absorb the shocks, and we don't have the resilience in the communities. And this is actually due to an underlying and fundamental challenge that we face. And it's not only in the Baltic Sea region, but it's globally. We have far too long time been focusing on economic growth. Also in the Baltic Sea region, the EU strategy is aiming prosperity. What is prosperity? What is the definition? Do we capture the definition of prosperity? We have created policies with the intention of raising GDP, but not with the intention of building stronger, resilient and healthy societies or reducing damage to the environment. And the shocks that we are currently experiencing, I think it's also fair to say that they are just an accelerator to make our shortcomings more visible. But the real challenge is systematic. And just an example of this being systematic, while we are aiming for economic growth, we are actually using the resources, we are pouring resources to fix and repair the damage, to clear up the pollution, to deal with the health impact that we have from chemicals in the environment, the antimicrobial resistance, that is another challenge around the corner, waiting there to come with a possible epidemic. The mental health epidemic mentioned already before, or just results of overeating or hangover. These are just a few to name here. And all these costs are avoidable. So we really need to make a fundamental shift in the paradigm, in the discourse, how we think about growth, and a fundamentally different approach to our societies. And we in the PA Health, we are preaching for the new paradigm, economy of well-being. And it's actually a very good opportunity to speak about it here in Finland, because it was Finland who has been one of the front runners to promote the approach. But also there are other Nordic countries doing quite well here, but we need to do more. And the EUSBSR is actually a perfect setting because we already have the structures, we have the sectors that can work cross-sectorally. We also have, it can be an institution for economy well-being. And what we are currently missing is that we have three targets or three priority areas, but we are missing one global common goal for all those three. We are saving the sea and we are connecting the people and we are increasing the prosperity. But what connects us? We are still working in those silos and trying with our activities to maybe aim one of the priorities. But we should have one universal goal, which is economy of well-being of all people. And which means actually that the distribution of the fruits of the growth will be fair and based on needs. And we should also think about that what makes us really happy, and or do we need all those lonely consumers who overconsume what is produced just for the incentive of getting the GDP increase? Or what is it what we really need and want in this society?
Thank you very much for all these all these topics that you mentioned, which are very important for us and for our society. And now I'd like to ask Mr. Slawomir Tokarski. You talk about Russian invasion of Ukraine and their consequences in case of these asymmetrical shocks for us. Is there any possibility, do we have any tools to protect our region, to protect our societies from these asymmetrical threats?
Well, I think certainly there is a role for cohesion policy, although it is not the cohesion policy alone can fix all the problems, right? You need a mix of national and European policies in order to protect regions from the impact of these asymmetric shocks. And you have to reflect on to what extent, again, we look at the short term and longer term, because I think we proved in the last year that we are able to react with cohesion policy to short-term challenges, and the pandemics and migration of Ukrainians were the examples where we allow member states to mobilize quickly resources to spend on those priorities. But we should not lose from our side the long-term goal, which is still this twin transition, green and digital. Certainly we should also reflect a bit more on the energy poverty, because this is perhaps the most imminent challenge, but the challenge is also requires a sort of longer-term approach. There is not a quick fix to this. And the programs, cohesion programs in the region should reflect this quite well. We should also look a little bit, if we are talking about the strategy itself, about the decision-making mechanism. I mean, it should be, if we really want to also address with this strategy some sort of new threats, new challenges, new problems, then we have to be sure that this mechanism is quite versatile and can react quickly. Then there is, I think, again, if there is the role for Baltic Sea strategy, there should be money. I was recently with colleagues in Slovenia, where we're talking about European strategy for Adriatic and Ionian Sea, and somebody said that there is a saying in Slovenian, you know, if you want to have a good music, you have to pay well the orchestra. And I think this is very true, that if you really want to have a role, then this embedding, I know it's not the most sexy word, but which basically means that we use for the implementation of the strategy not only Interreg programs, but also mainstream core programs should be taken very seriously. Then maybe there are two more issues. One is the involvement of civil society. And I think if you look at the example of what happened in Poland after when the first wave of Ukrainian migrants came, I think it will be very difficult to see how this migration, accommodation, help could be organized without the involvement of civil society. So we tend often to think that it's only member states, it's authorities that sort out something, but very often it can be done really with the help of NGO, the third sector of civil society. And then maybe the last point I would like to make is about the community and the role of the community in increasing resilience. Actually, if you look at the history of the word resilience, it comes from natural disasters and then how quickly community can bounce back to what was before. And then if you want to measure the strengths of this resilience, you look at two issues: how cohesive is the community, how solidarity it is, and whether you have people with new ideas, because the shock to resilience is always something unforeseen. So we need to provide something unforeseen in order to reply to this. So all those approaches in the policy which are based on the involvement of the community should be really promoted, because they are a sort of primary source of resilience. When, I think a couple of months ago, we had the launch of partnership agreements, so this is the start of the new cohesion policy for Finland. We had a chance to listen to a journalist from Helsinki Sanomat who decided to go to rural Finland and find out what's there, that there is so much misconception and lack of understanding between people who live in the countryside and people who live in the city. And the answer was basically that there were people, even in the Finnish society, which is well integrated, who feel really abandoned and to whom nobody is listening to. So the her answer to this problem was that policy should also take into account the emotions. We think sometimes we tend to forget that projects are good, but they also should create emotions, feeling of empathy, of solidarity. It's also important for well-being, because there is nothing worse than the persons feel really abandoned and feel confronted on their own with all those big forces that they can see. So I think it's also important to promote the cohesion policy. You have an example of energy community, something that has been launched very successfully. That is groups of people that are running production, consumption, and governance of renewable energy in the area. And that's something that gives them this impression that there is something that depends on us, that we can change somehow the reality that is around us, and that we are not alone. There is this new expression in English, which is called, I think, solastalgia, which talks about the impact of climate change on mental well-being. Which says that when people see that the world around them is changing very quickly, so it does not remind what they used to see, that creates a feeling of deep trauma. And if this is combined with the incapacity to act, then there is a big problem, there is a big issue. And Sami people, I think, sometimes they are a good example of this type of trauma. So those community-based approaches, when there is this collective action, I think there is a good remedy against this. And maybe last point, which is more methodological. I think we are talking here about resilience as bouncing back. I don't think that we can bounce back. I think that we simply need to find a new equilibrium, because I don't think we will come back to the world that we have seen in the past.
Thank you very much for your voice and let's say this statement about uncertainty and looking into future. It's really hard to predict and to find a satisfying answer. Now I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Tomasz Studzieniecki and ask you about you know, any recommendations how to deal with these minorities, with refugees, which were also mentioned by Mr. Tokarski.
Thank you very much for the interesting question. I would like to refer to last session we had here in this theater. It was very interesting about societal security. And in my opinion, one of the challenges is that Baltic Sea region has to be stable. And if the Baltic Sea region has to be stable, it means that the issues of social minorities, national minorities, ethnic minorities must be taken under consideration. I mean, in all levels, local level, regional level, national level, international level. Why is it so important? Because there are still situations that people don't have the knowledge. We have to be aware that there is foreign propaganda, and this foreign propaganda is showing that minorities create problems, especially in Poland. There is a very interesting campaign to explain people that minorities, especially Ukrainian minorities, are not dangerous. This campaign is also telling that they don't take jobs for Polish people. So I think that those campaigns are very, very important to show that we don't have to be afraid of national and ethnic minorities. And I would like to refer to Finnish singer, maybe people from Finland know, Sara Aalto. Sara Aalto had the very nice song, Don't Be Afraid, in 34 languages. So she may be like the ambassador of different languages, different minorities, and I think that it's really important to include the minorities in different processes, in decision-making processes. I think that they may be better represented in different projects, and in order to achieve it, I recommend the results, the results of our network. I think that the concept of non-territorial autonomy is the concept that may help our region to be stable. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. And finally, in this round, I'd like to ask Ms. Ulla-Karin about your recommendation, your perspective.
Thank you. Everybody before me spoke really interesting ideas, and I believe youth are all for it. We're always all for the better change, right? But coming back to what I mentioned previously with building resilience and capacity, I believe education is also really, really important. And of course, we need to deal with problems right now. However, preparing for future, we need to prepare for future generations. The youth, maybe not even my age, but the kids right now in the kindergarten or even younger, they need to be prepared as a society. And this is where education comes, right? Here colleagues mentioned, for example, lonely consumers. So having an educational program which deals with mental health, which helps children and young adults grow up to be healthy human beings, is effective and should be effective in helping the resilience of our community in the Baltic Sea region. At the same time, we have university students who, as we've seen in the youth camp and previous forums, would love to work with young professionals in other regions to create projects together for the same blue economy. And we promote the youth to be able to communicate together, to educate each other, and to educate younger than us, even older than us, to build a resilient society for it. And maybe for the EUSBSR stakeholders, here in this document in front of me, which is the EUSBSR Youth Declaration, which many of us contributed to writing, has many, many different topics, but one of the key factors that we highlight there is the communication and working together, because PA areas cannot be just separated. The youth can help unite them, just as it was mentioned before, right? Ministries working together. So PA stakeholders can also work together, uniting the same problems from different fields, but dealing with the same solutions, basically. So yeah, that's my take.
Okay, thank you very much for all panelists, for all speakers, for your answer to these two questions. And now I'd like to give the floor to our audience. Maybe we could ask and for 2 or 3 questions. We have 2 microphones. Yeah. So if you want, just raise your hand and we will give you a mic. Okay. So it's a quite interesting that we talk about shocks, and it seems to me that we are under shock after this. Yeah. So please.
Thank you. So, hi. Since I didn't want it to be first, but I have just really quick question, I guess, to all the panelists. Do you think that we actually, here in the Baltic Sea region, do we learn from the shocks that we experience? Like, did we learn from, let's say, pandemic? Did we do our lessons? And is it better when you compare it to the other European countries, to other European macro regions? So how do we stand there? Do we actually learn from the shocks? Because now there are new shocks and new crises, and as it was said, and I think that's really good point that you made, I'm talking to our youth speaker that, you know, we're not, that it's shocking that we're really shocked that there are still shocks. Yeah, I think that this is something that is really going to be happening. So do we at least learn from these shocks to be better prepared for the new ones that are coming? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe now it will be easier for another participants to ask. If no, then maybe I will give the possibility to answer to these questions. Maybe there will be another ones. Yeah, Mr. Šatūnas.
Okay, thank you. Yes and no. If you look at we took, again, I will take example, obviously, environment and fisheries. We took a lot of measures. We were seeing already continuous bad situation with the stocks in the Baltic Sea. We were taking some measures that really needed a lot of political consensus among the countries and the communities, but fisheries are not recovering. So it seems that just doing or working in silos in particular, let's say, areas does not bring the overall positive impact. I mean, that's why we not only need certain stakeholders or sectors to be involved to solving only one problem. It's a very interlinked. So that's why I think when we talk about environment, yes, we're learning, but we need to do more. So that's why when we proposed our Baltic conference, like I was mentioning before, we invited, you can say, 3 stakeholders on the problem: environment minister, fisheries minister, and agriculture minister, because all is interlinked. So we're learning a little bit, I would say, how to address the issue. Another thing is, again, when you look at the energy dependence of the region to the fossil fuels and to hydrocarbons imported from Russia. Now we're learning very quickly, obviously, because the shock or external pressure made us to learn very quickly. But I think that member states are learning, were learning in before. So that's why all these offshore wind projects, also facilitated by European Commission, but that was a learning curve before. So I think that we're learning, but the external shocks, they're helping to learn. And I'm not talking about COVID, where probably, again, coastal tourism, or we needed to adapt to new realities, how to do that. I think that the Baltic Sea region, in principle, is doing very well. If you look at the economic growth, stability, if you can look at other seas or other coastal areas, I think we're learning and producing, but it's not over, it's not enough. But external shock is sometimes, I think one colleague said that entire European community, so European Union was born because of huge external shock of the Second World War. So I don't say that we need such magnitude of the shock, but this external pressure for the reform innovation is obviously a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else? Yeah. Okay, so
maybe I can say something. So what are the lessons? Maybe I take 2 examples. One is the pandemics that you mentioned, and there I have the feeling that we learned a lesson, because if you recall the mess that was created by the member states, maybe I'm not too political now, but right after the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody was acting on its own, when they closing borders, creating problems for movement of goods, movement of people, that was a real disaster. And I think there the Commission acted really later on as a coordinator, both in the terms of the harmonization of requirements, standardized protocols, joint acquisition of vaccines, and so on and so on. So I think that this lesson was learned. So we have now the 4th, 5th wave, and so on. I think this will stay with us. And well, the crisis with Russia, I think also there I rather see that the glasses are full, in a sense that I think nobody expected European Union to act so swiftly and so decisively. If I think somebody hypothetically would ask question, what will happen if? we would not think that all these sanctions, all these actions that were announced were possible, but they were. So I think at least here we have some ground for the optimism.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, to this question, if we have learned, I think we really have learned to be more agile, to act much more quickly, and the shocks and challenges actually show us that some of the, I don't know, principles or rules which were never to be changed, they actually changed very quickly. One example is the remote work, for instance. There were many organizations that never even thought that it's possible, but it appeared that it is, and it was efficient. And also now during the war in Ukraine, there has been some measures taken by the EU very, very quickly, and some of the regulations that were changed with a flip of the finger. But I think we need to become much better actually in learning, and one of the things is that we still have in the back of the mind that we should build back, but better, as you said that. But we shouldn't build back better. We should really rethink and change the discourse and the paradigm. And I think this is what we have not learned yet. We are still using this prosperity and growth and the aiming. It takes time, but the EUSBSR is really a perfect setting to deliver collective well-being in our region, and so that it contributes to the region that is designed for communities and people, and regenerating the precious planet, and we can learn from each other, and this is actually underused opportunity in the EUSBSR. It gives us a perfect setting, but we need to become better, to learn from each other, to share with each other, and also to become better at involving communities, civil societies, and underrepresented groups in the strategy.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, of course, please.
I would just add that, of course, we are learning, right? However, I would like to highlight how long will we remember those lessons also. And I think this is actually a nice thing that maybe the youth can play a role as the mechanism to be reminders for whoever is the learning people right now that, you know, this happened, and just reminding what has been learned and what should be taught for future generations to come. Because, well, we have to remember that, right?
Okay, thanks. Yes.
I think that the question raised by Magdalena is not only a good, but it's a difficult question. So if we ask the question, did we learn? I will give 3 cases from Polish borders. If we think about, for example, Polish-Russian border, the situation was very easy. There was a mass to decrease the border traffic. So if we think about Belarusian border, that is really a very difficult situation. It's very, very hard to say did we learn or not, because there was the Shakespeare question to let them to let the refugees in or to stop them, and there is no good answer. But there is one good lesson that Mr. Tokarski mentioned. I mean the Polish-Ukrainian border, and I think that Poland made very good results of this lesson. So I think that what did we learn? We learned how to give newcomers education, healthcare, and employment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answers. Do we have any other questions right now? Yes.
Thank you very much. I would like to follow up on what Ulla-Karin, Nurm, has said about not increasing prosperity. Because this is really appealing for me, and I've heard the notion that maybe we should not hunt prosperity and growth so much, but rather from activists, NGOs, and not from politicians and decision makers. So my question would be how ready we are for concentrating on health and well-being rather than increasing prosperity, which is one of the long-term goals for the strategy. So it would be revolution if we wanted to change something here. Thank you.
Thank you for this excellent question. And there is no easy answer, direct answer to this. What I said was to provoke thinking in this community, and we need to do it more. And as a first step, what we all can do, we can act as citizens. We can think about it, we can talk about it, we can advocate about the economy of well-being, and we can also share our experiences. And this is the minimum what we can do, but it is a huge step already forward. And also we can rethink how we measure the success in the society. Are we measuring it in economic terms, or can we measure in different indicators, such as healthy life years, healthy life years, education, reduced inequalities, access of marginalized groups to services, dignity. Can we measure dignity? I don't know, but we should. I think we should measure dignity, especially in the light of living in this demographic change and aging population. Can we measure happiness? Can we measure happiness? What makes us happy? Is it consuming more, having a yoga retreat in India, or is it something different? I think I would like to leave those questions to the audience to think, because there are no answers. But I'm happy to elaborate further if there will be more questions like this. Thank you.
Yeah, if you want, answer.
Thank you. Well, prosperity in general is whatever humans decide, right? We can decide what is happy, what is good for us, and maybe working as a society together with the youth that we can learn. And maybe we can just start by having a more rounded understanding of what that prosperity is, not only from a consumerism side, but starting to add the happiness index, right? Or adding the same dignity answers. Just starting to think about it is already a great step, I think. And especially for the youth, the mental crisis has been mentioned already. And the depression that's coming from thinking about the climate change, which is on our heads right now, because we will have to live in that world very, very soon. That's not helping. And just starting to incorporate it all in that understanding of our world, I think that's really a key importance issue.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to add, which I actually forgot to mention, that what we really need leadership. I think we need more ambition and more leadership to answer your question. If this is revolutionary and if we need to shift our minds and make the change, the ambition has to be there and the leadership has to be there. And I'm not talking about just administering or supervising the strategy, but true leadership.
I would like to refer to this interesting issue of happiness I have just published the results of the research and the paper titled Wealth or Happiness, the Dilemma of European Union. And that was one set result, that the richest countries are not the happiest countries.
Okay, thanks. Do we have another question? Another comment? So far we had two questions. The first one was referred rather to the past and let's say our experience. Did we learn something from the past? And the second question, I think that's it's rather about the future. So how to rethink? In what ways should we rethink our GDP growth or something like that? If you don't have any questions, I have a question also to all these panelists, because from my point of view, it's really interesting to get your answer for us, maybe also. In your opinion, in your recommendation, what should we achieve in the next years, taking into account, you know, all these shocks that were and still are here in the Baltic Sea region? How can we prepare to deal with them in a better way? With these environmental challenges, with these social challenges, maybe with Russian invasions and its consequences. Any recommendations? Please help us.
I would like to give a floor for academia first and then to think. Still thinking, maybe academia has the responses.
I can do it. It sounds very trivial. I'm sorry about this, that it sounds so trivial, but we need to achieve better coordination between the different layers of the strategy and between the different sectors. And this is already a good step forward. We can take those small baby steps, which are not really baby steps, and it already gets us much better in building this resilience. So just better coordination between the different layers and players in the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that this is a very important issue, and I would like just to mention that it is as important that European Union within Horizon 2020 just started the initiative called Intergovernmental Coordination from local to European level, so we would be happy to cooperate with you within this project.
I would have maybe a couple of things to mention. I think it's important to focus and not to lose ourselves among three trees. Let's say, I think that we're talking, sometimes we focus on the specific projects. Is it okay? Environment, offshore, youth maybe, but we need to have a horizontal approach to the problems or to the shocks. So I think that what is key, that we should not work in silos. Avoiding working in silos might create a really answers to various questions, because sometimes, like I was mentioning, we're trying to address one problem, but we're maybe creating a problem somewhere else. So that's why this working not in silos or cross-cutting issues, that are also being set in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that's a key. We have not mentioned them here, but they are global and they have a horizontal approach. And then maybe one more thing is, we're trying to promote a lot of structures, maybe financing instruments. That's all good, but we need to stick to the principles. And I think the key principle, what all we do is sustainability. That's why we're trying EU legislation, in financing principles, we try to inject sustainability principles. So that's a key, because that's a not short-term project financing. It's not short-term from one financial perspective to another financial, but then we do the instruments. But it's a principle that will drive not only the public sector, but the private sector as well. So I think two things. Cooperation is absolutely must, a regional one, but not working in silos, even in the same national politics, but also having some principles above the maybe time frames or the certain sectors. Thank you.
And I will just add that obviously horizontal cross-cutting is really, really important, and we can add the youth. Even if the youth can, you know, be the random knockers on doors in different sectors and different levels, we can maybe help bridge those, because, you know, we can meet in universities with the stakeholders of different kinds and have interesting meetings. We actually have even a point here in the declaration if anybody will be interested in reading about it. But bridging the gaps, the youth can help with that too.
Well, I think coordination point is very well taken. And then probably we also need to make the best use of this collective intelligence that we have in Baltic Sea, both to predict what might happen, but also to find solutions.
And can I add to this, because it reminded me that one important aspect is also this capitalizing on this multi-sectoral knowledge that we can create within the EUSBSR. Again, it gives us a perfect opportunity. Working with the other sectors, we create new knowledge, and this is this multi-sectoral knowledge. And just an example, we have a little bit of time. I will do it. We in the policy area health, we have initiated this cross-sectoral work, and this is building on since we have objectives health in our policies, working with other sectors, and we have engaged with cultural sector, developing projects to understand how engagement in creative activities, cultural activities, arts is having influence on people's health and well-being. And very soon we are going to participate in a project that is looking into the arts, social prescribing arts on prescription, which is a very good example how this multi-sectoral or cross-sectoral knowledge can be created.
Okay, thank you. I think that we have time for the last question. If there is anyone who is interested, please ask very quickly. Yes, please.
Hello everyone. I have such a question. So probably today we talked more about common crises, common shocks coming from outside, like climate change, COVID, or war aggression. But if we talk and compare, for example, some domestic crises and domestic shocks for each country, so what will be the correlation? How could we prioritize, and how can we deal with it, that each country has its domestic crises and different priorities to solving them? So should the countries, I don't know, cooperate or take each one priority first, and how to deal with it? Just thinking about it. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, so.
Thank you, very good question. And this is again the place where this sharing and learning aspect comes into place, that we can share and learn from each other and support each other. Promoting now our claims in the policy area health, we have defined them, sharing, learning and caring. And this is exactly what we can do collectively, that if there is one country with a domestic issue, And very often those domestic issues spill over. There is it can be a trickle down, or it's just spilling over to other countries as well. And sharing with the peers, bringing the peers together is something which is very hard to measure. And for some people who really want to put the finger on the numbers and these traditional indicators, it's very hard to say that the peers who come together and who share the knowledge, that they can work better, they can do their work better next day. And this is what we can do here.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. This reminded me of actually what we wrote in the declaration, which was actually my kind of a fun point we had here about creating a Baltic Sea region culture. We called it the cult, just shortening. But the reality is that by creating a community of a Baltic Sea region, which would be an identity, right? Because currently we've been talking that maybe where we are currently is just a geographical region with knowledge clusters, people who might want to work on this, but it's not really high on the agenda. So maybe working as the youth to promote the common identity, to feel as I am and you are and all of us here are Baltic Sea region citizens. Not just EU citizens, not just our own national citizens, but actual identity of the Baltic Sea region. And by that, maybe that will help to speed up the whole best practices usage, right? The Baltic Sea region is small, and many problems do spill over, or they are repeated in one part of history or the other. So by connecting the people, we can maybe mitigate the possibility to have to prioritize too much one subject over the other, where we can maybe work on, you know, building the resilience together at the same time for everybody.
If I may, I think all politics are local, so this is a response to reality. Election cycles, national issues makes the priority, obviously. But I think that's why this regional cooperation, or maybe various platforms, instruments, and European Union as a project, with regional projects and initiatives, can be and is a response. When member states are coming to agree about the next financial perspective, and then we all negotiate and set the priorities, that's kind of a framing how probably not a one country but overall group or regions will be responding to the challenges. So I would say strong regional cooperation, not only structures but practices are important, because that creates not a vicious cycle, but that creates a positive momentum to engage and not to slip. Because obviously that some regional communities or member states can slip because of internal national politics dynamics. But the structures are bringing usually back because there are certain priorities, milestones. So that's why I think maybe it's very technical, or maybe I'm getting from philosophical questions to practical, but this EU response to the COVID crisis, that really helped not to slip into the divisions in the internal market, into divisions in buying the vaccines, but also in the recovery. And this recovery and resilience facility instrument that EU never has done, I mean going and borrowing in the global markets on overall, that created also instrument, if we properly implement the milestones and targets, how member states will go together in overall big target, digital transition and green transition. Now, yes, we are under the pressure coming from various challenges. Is it okay, migration or escape from the war from Ukraine? Now maybe Russian pressure. But again, these milestones that are there for green and digital transition, they're there. Maybe we are not sometimes putting them, like I said, on the top of the political decision making, but there is inertia that we need to use, a positive one. So I think that the European Commission, all the programs that we have, but the member states agreed, EU legislation sometimes is being blamed for over legislative burden, but this is the value added that might help to overcome the national dynamics or problems.
Okay, so let me ask the final question to our panelists, because our time is almost finished. What do you feel is the key element of our panel? What is your key takeaway? Mr. Šatūnas?
Takeaway of the panel that we should not forget about invisible shocks that are there. And we need to really political leadership to bring not visible shocks onto the surface of the problems. I remember I was working in some other big capitals and over Atlantic, and it was being said that big capital can handle 2 crises at a time. I mean, attention span. But what is important for us really to have a span of attention span to the shocks that are less visible. So that would be a big recommendation, a big call to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ulla-Karin Nurm.
Thank you. I would like to use this opportunity, this unique opportunity, and thank you for an invitation to this panel, because it is not very common that health is in the focus. And I really appreciate the health and well-being has become a stronger focus in the EUSBSR, because health has always been seen as a cost and something which is not generating, but is an expense. And I appreciate that it's possible to be here and to trying to shift this discourse towards thinking of redefining our thinking about well-being. And as already said, we need better coordination, more ambition and leadership, and maybe we should really try collectively to establish a common goal for the strategy. This is not very revolutionary, it's just a little step up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slawomir Tokarski.
Well, I think if this saying we heard so many times that crisis is also an opportunity is true, then probably it's an opportunity for the strategy to play a bigger role, to gain more importance, and also to reinforce or give a boost to this regional identity that is also important for all of us, to create also the feeling of responsibility and sort of urge for action. And I think from this point of view, if you look at this core mission statement for Baltic Sea strategy, Save Our Sea, the sea that connects, I think it's quite well placed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tomasz Studzieniecki.
I would like to refer to the issue my colleague mentioned, what is the priority, and one of the priorities is sustainable development. And if we think about sustainable development, it means that we have to involve all stakeholders. And all stakeholders also mean national and ethnic minorities. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Simonas.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what we heard today is that there's a lot of crises, and sadly we will have to keep dealing with them. But what we need to do, is to unite and cooperate, no matter on what level, between stakeholders, the youth, young people, young professionals, just to work together and to try and work as much horizontally as possible to deal with the same issues from different angles, because that's just going to be easier and way more effective.
Okay, thank you. Dear speakers, dear guests, thank you for our inspiring discussion. I would like to encourage you to discuss all other interesting issues later in smaller groups. We are in time, and let me briefly, let's say, summarize what we heard. And I'd like to say that we heard from our distinguished speakers about different challenges, different shocks to the Baltic Sea region, environmental, social, political, also domestic ones. We also heard about possible responses to these shocks and challenges. They pay attention to the regional cooperation between different levels, between different layers, to the horizontal approach. And let me finish with two personal opinions. I treat this recovery process in a similar way like preparation to run in an ultramarathon. This is a very long, tough and arduous process. But as soon as it is well taken, the profit and views are outstanding. And I wish all of you to achieve this goal as a team, because a teamwork cooperation between different levels is the best way to implement the strategy in the practice. And I firmly believe that as a part of the Baltic Sea strategy, and if you will work together, you are able to provide resources that our regional system needs to transform inputs into outputs. And this conversion is needed to maintain the system and is crucial to its adaptation to risk, to another shocks, challenges and crises coming from the environment. We are living in a very turbulent times, and no one is able to predict what will happen tomorrow. But as a researcher, I firmly believe that we are able to recover, taking into account your dedication and ideas that were born during this forum. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the organizers for this great discussion.